hope is really useful information to share, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Erin Donahue Keeler. I'm an attorney with the Georgia Justice Project. Thank you so much for being here for part 2 of our webinar series on pardons. If you missed part 1, don't worry. You can find the recording on our website, and our pardon toolkit, which will be coming very soon, will walk you through every step of the pardon process. Today, we'll go deeper into the application itself, how to fill it out, what to include, and what happens after you submit it. Before we dive in, we have a few housekeeping matters. We've got quite a large group today, which is wonderful. So we ask that you please use the question and answer box, the Q&A box, if you have any questions for us. If we're going to cover something later on in the presentation, we'll let you know that, and we'll do our best to answer as many of your questions as we can. One important thing to know, we can't answer questions about your specific personal situation or your specific record during this webinar. Please keep your questions general. This webinar is being recorded, and we wouldn't want you to put any personal information into a public webinar. Remember, you don't need a lawyer to apply for a pardon. Anyone can do it. Sometimes we at Georgia Justice Project help a very small number of people, but please keep in mind that we are a small office. Our intake is currently closed and will not reopen until January. This slide is our starting point for today. This is where we're going to set the stage for what a pardon is and why it matters. A pardon is an official act of forgiveness from the state of Georgia, usually for a felony conviction. It doesn't erase or expunge your record, but it does show that the state recognizes you've turned your life around and are living as a law-abiding person. Getting a pardon can make a real difference. It can help when you're applying for a job, housing, or certain licenses. And in many cases, it's also the first step toward having your record expunged later on. One of the biggest things we want people to know is that this process is doable. Again, you don't have to be a lawyer or even have one representing you to apply for a pardon. It does take time and effort, but it's absolutely something you can do by yourself with the right guidance and support. Today, we'll go through the entire application process together, remind you of what you need, how to tell your story, and what to expect once you've submitted your pardon application. By the end of this session, you'll have a clear sense of what the board is looking for and how to present your best self through this process. I'll start by sharing just a little bit about who we are. Georgia Justice Project, or GJP, is a nonprofit law firm that's been around for over 35 years. We provide legal help and advocate for changes that make it easier for people with records to move forward. Our goal is simple: to reduce the number of people under correctional control in Georgia and remove the barriers that make it hard for people to rebuild their lives after a conviction. Let's do a quick recap from part 1 of our webinar series. There are a few different kinds of pardons, but today we're focusing on what's called a general pardon. We will not be talking about restoration of firearm rights, pardons for cases that required someone to register for the sexual offender registry, pardons for federal convictions, or for cases that happened outside of Georgia. A pardon is an official order of forgiveness from the state of Georgia. It's granted by the State Board of Pardons and Paroles, not the president or the federal government, and not the governor. A pardon alone does not expunge your record, but it does officially recognize that you've turned your life around and are living as a law-abiding citizen. And that's powerful. It can open doors, help with jobs or housing, and again, make you potentially eligible for expungement later on. A few reminders that your pardon application won't be processed if it's incomplete, and all the information you put into your pardon application must be accurate. If you don't know something, that's okay. But you'll be signing an oath when you submit your application saying that everything you've shared is true. This process can feel like a big undertaking, but there are a lot of ways to make it manageable. Over the years, GJP has learned some lessons from the people that we've supported, and these are our top 10 tips. First of all, be patient. This process can take time, so try to see it as a journey rather than something that happens quickly. Second, it's really helpful if you make sure you're eligible before you get started. That can save you a lot of frustration later on. Third, get organized. We suggest that you create a folder for your documents and keep notes on what you've sent and to whom. Staying organized really helps in preparing your application and when it's time to have an interview or if the board asks for more information. Next, think about who can support you through this process. Letters of recommendation can be a big help in showing your growth. So reach out to people who know you well and can speak honestly about your character and progress. They just can't be family members. Another important piece of advice is to take accountability in your application. Don't shy away from your past, but focus on what you've learned and how you've changed. And while we know that writing can be tough, take your time with your answers. Writing is a process. It will probably require that you write it, edit, and ask someone that you trust to read it over if you can. And finally, don't be afraid to brag on yourself. This is the place to highlight your successes. Talk about what you're proud of, your work, your family, your community involvement. The board wants to understand who you are now and not just what's on the paper. These tips are all about helping you tell your story clearly and confidently, and every step you take in this process is a step toward more opportunity. Now that we've talked about what a pardon is and how to prepare, let's look closely at the application itself. This part can feel overwhelming at first, but we're going to walk you through it step by step so you know what to expect. Here is what the pardon application website looks like, along with the URL where you can find it. If you can't read it on your screen, especially if you're joining by your phone, don't worry. We will send out a copy of our slides after today's webinar, and you can also access the application by looking it up on the State Board of Pardons and Paroles website. If it's your first time applying, you'll need to create an account. Be sure to use an email address that you check regularly. That is how the board will communicate with you. This site uses something called two-factor authentication, which just means that after you enter your password, they'll send you a code to your email. You'll use that code to finish logging in. So again, it's really important that you use an email address that you can easily access. Perhaps you've already had a chance to look through the pardon application. It's very detailed. There are several sections that cover different parts of your background. We're going to touch on each of them and highlight common questions that come up, especially for the sections about your offense details and the justification for consideration. Those two sections are where you'll tell your story, so we'll spend some extra time there. It's important to know that once you submit your application, an investigator from the State Board of Pardons and Paroles will verify all the information that you include. That means that accuracy really matters. If something is left blank or is incomplete, it can slow down the process or delay the review of your application. The first part of the application asks for your personal and contact information. things like your full name, address, date of birth, and social security number. If you don't remember an exact month or date for an address, that's okay. If you know the month and year, we use the first of that month as a placeholder. If you only know the year, we use January 1st as the date. The application does require that you input a specific date. So for example, if you remember that you lived at a certain address and you moved in November of 2016, but you don't remember the exact date, you can put November 1st of 2016. If you know that you started a certain job in 2008, but you can't remember the exact month or date, you could put in January 1st of 2008. You do want it to be as clear and complete as you possibly can. Here's a couple of quick tips for this demographic section. First, double check your contact information. Make sure your phone number and again, that email address are up to date and are numbers and addresses that you currently use. Secondly, you'll see a space to enter what's called an FBI number. You may have this if you have gotten an FBI background check for yourself. That number will appear there, but if you don't know it, that's fine. You can leave it blank. The board will be able to access that information on their end. The application website will pop up a warning box saying something along the lines of, "You've forgotten to input your FBI number," and that may delay processing of your application. Many of the clients that we work with don't have that information, and we often leave it blank. This section asks about your education and military service, if it applies. Here, you'll include any degrees, GED programs, training programs, or certifications you've earned. Even short courses or professional trainings are worth listing. They show effort and growth. If you served in the military, you'll include your discharge status here. Just a note, if someone was dishonorably discharged, that does mean they can't apply for a restoration of firearm rights, but it does not affect their eligibility for a general pardon. Next, the application asks for your employment history. This section, along with the address history, can take the most amount of time to put together. You must include each job you've had since you finished the end of your sentence. When you fill out this section, there's not a lot of room to explain. Our advice is to list your jobs as accurately as you can, even including short-term or part-time ones. If you have a period of unemployment, you will list that in the application as well. If you left a job, be honest about it. But if there's a way to frame it in a positive way, do that. For example, you might say that you left a job to pursue a better opportunity, or because you had a schedule change, or to focus on your family. If you were fired or had some sort of problem at a job, take accountability for what you can, but keep it brief. Something along the lines of, "I learned from this experience and have grown since then." The main goal here is to show stability, responsibility, and progress, even if your work history hasn't been perfect. The next section is the substance abuse and mental health history. If you've had treatment or support for either one of these during or after your sentence, include that information here. It helps show the progress you've made and the steps that you've taken to stay healthy. The application also asks whether, since your sentence ended, you've used illegal drugs or abused alcohol or prescription medication. That question can be confusing. It's not asking if you occasionally have a drink of alcohol or take medications that are prescribed by your doctor. They're asking if you've used substances in a way that was a problem or harmful. Again here, if you don't remember every detail about treatment dates or providers, that's okay. Just be honest and give as much information as you can. Google is your friend when you are applying for a pardon. And if you've made progress, like you've completed a program, you've stayed sober for several years, or you're in continued counseling, this is a really good place to share that information. Again, those are all signs of stability and commitment that the board wants to see. Next up is the section about civil and financial information. This section asks about things like debt, lawsuits, or other pending proceedings. A few things to keep in mind here. You only need to list debt that is in collections. If you're making regular payments and staying current, you don't have to include those. So if you have $10,000 on your credit card, but you're paying every month, you do not need to include that information. If you want to double check, it could be a good idea to request a credit report on yourself. If you've ever been part of a lawsuit, the most common example of this is a car accident or something like that. You'll list it in this section as well. If you can't remember details about the lawsuit, the courts keep those records, and many courts put them online. You can find details about the case by searching the court clerk and your name. You can always go in person to the clerk's office to request more information about those cases. Finally, if you have any pending proceedings, like a bankruptcy, eviction, or an occupational license hearing, you'll include that here too. The key word, though, is pending. If those matters have been resolved, if those things are finished, you don't need to list it. The last section I'm going to talk about today is the charitable and community activities section. This is the first section where you really get to shine. Think about the ways that you are giving back. That could be volunteering, mentoring, helping at your church or community center, or even caring for a family member. You can share why those activities matter to you and how they've helped you grow. The board is looking for signs that you're engaged, responsible, and contributing to your community, and this is a great place to show that. And we encourage you to think outside the box. Maybe you're working 2 jobs and don't have time to spend 10 hours a week building houses with Habitat for Humanity or another charity or traditional nonprofit. But maybe you pick up your elderly neighbor's prescriptions from the pharmacy, or babysit for your friends while they're at work, or mow your uncle's lawn. Those things all count, and we would encourage you to include them in your pardon application. Now we're going to move into what might be the most important part of your application, the storytelling sections. In the next few slides, my colleague Sarah Oftenkamp is going to take you through how to approach the offense details and the justification for consideration sections. These are where you'll share your story, your growth, and the impact that you've made since your conviction. These 2 parts give the board the chance to see the person you are today, not just the person on paper. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Erin. Hi, everyone. As Erin said, my name is Sarah Oftenkamp, and I am a staff attorney here at the Georgia Justice Project. Thank you all for being here today. And we are going to dive right in with the the offense details section. Here we go. So the offense details section asks you to describe what happened that led to your arrest and conviction in the cases that you're asking for a pardon on. So you're going to want to include the details for each of the convictions that you're asking for a pardon. For example, if you have 2 felony convictions in the state of Georgia, then you're going to want to include a paragraph about each of those convictions. The goal of this section is to take responsibility and accountability. So you're going to want to stick to the facts, explain why you were arrested, Talk about what happened when you went to a court, including your sentence. Your court documents can be really helpful with this because they're going to have information like dates and what the sentence was. So use those court documents when you're writing this section. And I would recommend not trying to write this section until you have collected those court documents so that you have all the information that you need. If you have any probation violations or revocations, you're going to want to address those as well. And you're going to do this process for each conviction that you're asking for a pardon on. So when I write these sections, I keep them very straightforward and to the point. Something like, on October 20th, 2010, I was arrested for possession of cocaine. On December 12th, 2010, I pleaded guilty and I was sentenced to 5 years of probation. On February 28th, 2012, my probation was revoked after I failed to report. After that, I successfully completed my sentence, and I'm sorry for the actions that I took that led to my conviction. Just something very simple like that that hits all the steps of the process and shows that you're taking responsibility. If any of your convictions involve a victim or an allegation of violence, you're going to need to provide more details about what occurred. In the toolkit that we're going to be sending out, we're going to have some examples of an offense details section that's a more routine offense, and also a couple of examples of what to do in situations where there is a victim or an allegation of violence, so that you're going to have an example of how to write this section in both of those situations. We talked about what you do want to do, the offense details. Now we're going to talk about what we do not want to do in the offense details section. First of all, we do not want to dispute or disagree with the facts of the case. We know from working with our clients that very often folks have felony convictions for things that they never did. Maybe you were arrested for something that you didn't do, and when you considered taking an offered plea deal for 2 years of probation, or on the other hand, going to trial and facing maybe multiple years of incarceration, maybe you weighed the pros and cons and thought, let me just take this plea deal. It's the safest, fastest route for me. We know that that happens, but that is not what the board wants to hear on your pardon application. The board wants to hear that you are taking responsibility and accountability. So rather than saying something like, I didn't do anything, or it wasn't me, focus on what you can take responsibility for. So sometimes for our clients, that'll look like things like, I was hanging out with a group of people that I knew were trouble, or I was making bad decisions and putting myself in bad situations. Look at the situation and find something that you can own and take responsibility for. We don't want to assign blame or to other things or other people. That's kind of goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about. Let's say you're driving with a friend, the friend has cocaine on him, you get pulled over, both of you are arrested. We don't want to say it was my friend's cocaine. We want to explain what happened in the situation, but not blame the friend. Again, taking accountability for what you can. And lastly, we don't want to use this section to explain why you were in a situation where a felony was committed. As we talked about in part one, for many, many folks, there is a background story that sheds light on why someone was arrested and convicted of a felony. That is an important piece of the puzzle, and we want to talk about that, but we don't want to talk about that here in the offense section. Here, we want to stick to the facts of what occurred and what led to the arrest and the conviction. Now we're going to talk about the justification for consideration section, another one of the storytelling sections of the pardon application. The justification for consideration section asks you to describe why you are applying for a pardon, how your life has changed, and why you feel that you are a good candidate for a pardon. If you were here for part one, Cooper talked about telling your story. And that kind of introspection is going to be really helpful when you're writing this section. This section is where we want to talk about if there's any past story that is relevant to how you wound up with a felony conviction. So that could be something like a story about childhood abuse that led to poor decision making in your early adult life, or maybe you had addiction or substance abuse issues that were playing into how you were making decisions. Maybe you were in an abusive relationship. Whatever that backstory is, if it's relevant to the felony conviction, you want to describe that here in the justification section. We don't want to stop there though, because we are not the sum of our past. We want to talk about how your life has changed. And we want the pardon board to understand how you have grown and changed. So think about what has changed in your personal life. Maybe you've gotten married. Maybe you've had a child or children. Maybe you had substance abuse issues, but you've been able to get sober. Maybe you've joined a religious organization and that's given you some clarity. Maybe you just grew up and thought, I don't want to live my life like this anymore. I did that when I was a kid and now I'm an adult and I'm ready to move on. Whatever personal life accomplishments you've made, describe those to the board. You're also going to want to highlight achievements you've had. That could be achievements in education. Maybe you've gotten your GED, your associate's degree, your bachelor's degree, whatever that is, describe that to the board. Talk about professional achievements. Maybe you've gotten job training or you've gotten an HVAC certification. Maybe you've worked at the same employer for the past 20 years. Those kind of achievements, please describe those to the board. Maybe you did struggle with substance abuse issues and you've gone through treatment and you've been sober for the past 10 years. When I'm writing a justification for consideration section, if I have an individual who has gotten sober, I will always make sure to celebrate that because that is a huge achievement. Also think about what kind of roles and responsibilities do you have in your home or community now? That could be that you're a parent to children, an employee at your employer. Maybe you're a deacon in your church. Talk about that. Talk about maybe you coach soccer for your child's soccer team. Maybe you're a caretaker for your elderly mother or a mentor in your community to the youth in your community, or just a financial provider. I say just, it's a huge deal to be a financial provider for your family. So talk about those roles and responsibilities that you have. We know that this is not an easy section to write and that it requires a lot of vulnerability and revisiting of history that you probably don't want to go back and have to think about. But please do that internal reflection because your honesty and vulnerability will come through in the pardon application if you do the work. Second area that we want to address in the justification for consideration section is the barriers that you have faced due to your criminal record. So these barriers can be various things. Here are some of the most common ones we hear. Employment. Maybe you can't get any job. Maybe you can get a job, but it's not the job you want. Or maybe you have a great job that you love and they want to promote you. You're doing such a great job, they want to promote you, but they can't promote you because of your background. Definitely include those factors in the justification for consideration. Housing is another very common one. Perhaps you can't get an apartment because of your record, or we often have it come up for senior housing. It's problematic for senior housing. If you're having occupational or professional licensing issues, please describe those. Maybe you can't go with your kid to chaperone their field trip because the school requires a background check. Share that. And maybe it's just this cloud of this conviction has been hanging over your head for 10, 20, 30 years, and you are tired of having it there always in the back of your mind. Talk about that. That is the dignitary harm is also a barrier that we want you to be able to discuss. In the toolkit, we're going to have more detailed information about how to write the justification for consideration section. So please do check that out when we have that ready for you. For all three of the storytelling sections, the charitable and community activities, the offenses, and the justification for consideration sections, we recommend writing these sections in a program like Word or Google Docs. It's going to be easier for you to edit it that way. It's also going to catch more spelling and grammatical errors if you do it in a program like that. When you are finished writing those sections, reach out to one or maybe even a couple of your close family members or friends, people who know you well, and ask them if they will read through those sections just to make sure that you've captured everything. Then when you're done, you've given it a final proofreading, checked all those spelling errors, checked your grammatical errors, and you're ready to put it on the pardon application. You'll just be able to copy and paste it from that Word document or Google document into the pardon application. When you do, make sure to hit save at the bottom of the page of the pardon application and then hit the complete button. And that's going to ensure that all of your information is saved on the pardon application. Now we're going to talk about what documents you're required to attach to the pardon application and what documents we recommend that you include with your application. These are the documents that are required to be attached to your pardon application. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I do want to address some common situations that come up with our clients when we're doing pardon applications. You can see that you're required to attach both proof of income and proof of residence. We get the question, what do I do if I don't have stable housing or if I don't have an income? So let's say, for example, that you're living in between your car and hotel because you can't get an apartment due to your background. What do you do? In that situation, we recommend writing a short statement explaining what is happening in your situation. So that could look something like, in 2022, I lost my apartment and I haven't been able to get housing since that time. I've been applying and I've been being denied because of my criminal record. Something very short, say what's occurring, and then you upload that as your proof of residence. Same thing if you didn't have income. Write a statement letting the board know what's happening. That may look like, I haven't been able to get work for the past 2 years. Each time I apply, I'm denied employment because of my record. I continue to apply, and I'm hopeful that if I'm able to get a pardon, I will be able to get hired somewhere. You'll see in the note, in the bullet just below that, you're required to upload certified dispositions for all of your felony convictions. This is also required for any out-of-state felony convictions. So the board is not pardoning out-of-state felony convictions, but they want to see a copy of any out-of-state felony convictions that you have. Additionally, you must upload a certified disposition for any cycle on your GCIC report that is marked as time expired restricted. We talked about this in part 1 of the pardon webinar, and so I would direct you to go back and look at that section of the pardon webinar if you have any questions about that. Going back to the certified dispositions that you are required to attach for your felony convictions. If your conviction had an allegation of violence, for example, like an aggravated assault, you also need to include either the indictment or the police report for that case, and you would upload that with your disposition. We have letters of recommendation listed here as a required document. Technically, letters of recommendation are only required if you're asking for restoration of firearms rights. If you are not asking for firearms rights restoration, we still recommend that you submit 3 letters of recommendation, but you are not required to do so. And we're going to be talking in just a minute about some recommendations for what to put in those letters. And if you look at the next to last item on the list, it says oath and waivers. The board requires all applicants to submit a notarized oath stating that everything that's on your pardon application is true and correct, and also information waiver. If you're asking for restoration of firearms rights, the board also requires you to submit a notarized medical record waiver. You can get those documents from the pardon application, the electronic pardon application. There's a link to them on the document page of the pardon application. So you can click that, download those, print them out, and take them to a notary to get them notarized. To upload documents to the pardon application, there are a couple of requirements. First, the document has to be saved as a PDF. Second, the name of the document cannot have any special characters. It can only have letters and numbers, and that includes spaces. So for example, if I'm trying to upload my proof of employment and I have it saved as proof space of space employment, I'm not going to be able to upload that document. I'm either going to need to take it down to one word and just call it employment, or I'm going to need to run those 3 words together with no spaces, proof of employment. I'm going to talk now about recommended documents, documents that are not required, but we think are helpful to attach to your pardon application so that the board can get a feel for the totality of your life. When you're writing your justification section, ask yourself, are there any awards, diplomas, or things like that that support your story? For example, maybe you were just awarded Employee of the Year at your work, or you were just given an award for 10 years of employment service, or maybe you've gotten your associate's degree, anything like that. Take a picture of that and upload it as supporting proof of your story that you tell in your justification section. This could also include a certificate of recovery or a certificate that you completed substance abuse training. We also recommend you upload a picture or two of you so that the board has a face to put to your name. So this could be a picture of you maybe with your family, a picture of you out in the community doing something. I once had a client who sent me a picture of him and his dog, and who doesn't love that? But it's just so the board has a face to put with your name. And then we have letters of recommendation listed here. I will say it again, letters of recommendation are required if you are asking for firearms restoration. If you are not asking for firearms restoration, we still recommend that you submit 3 letters of recommendation. And let's talk about what those letters need to look like. Think of 3 non-relatives who know you well. Talk to them about why you're asking for a pardon and what you hope a pardon will do for you. In the toolkit, there's going to be a template letter of recommendation that you can share with anyone that you ask to write a letter for you. And that template letter is going to help you with formatting, as well as what types of information to include in the letters. Again, if you're asking for firearms restoration, you're required to have 3 letters of recommendation, and there are some extra requirements for those letters. First, all 3 letters must be notarized. The letters must include the name, address, and telephone number of the letter's author. And each letter must have this sentence, quote, "I understand that I am recommending your name for restoration of firearms rights." All of those requirements are put into our template letter of recommendation. So when you pull that up, you'll be able to see exactly what you need to include if you are asking for firearms restoration. Now, I know that is a lot of information between what Erin and I have just told you, and I'm sure your head is probably spinning a little bit, and you're thinking, I can't, I don't even know what to do with this. But I'm going to give you a little bit of a pep talk. You can do this. You do not need an attorney. You can do this. Take it step by step. Do not try to do it in one day. Do not even try to do it in one weekend. Work on each section. Give yourself a lot of time and a lot of patience. Gather those documents that we talked about in part 1 beforehand so that you're armed with the information you need, and give yourself a lot of grace and a lot of time in doing this. You can do it. We have individuals come to us who have gotten pardons on their own very frequently. This is a process you can do. It's just going to take some patience and a little self-love. I want to talk about what happens after you have submitted your pardon application. 2 options after you have hit that submit button to send your pardon application in. An investigator from the state board is going to review that application to ensure that it has all of the information that you are required to submit. Then you will either get an email that says that your application is being forwarded to an investigator. If you get that email, what it means is you've done everything you needed to do at this point, and that your application is moving on to the next step in the process, which is an interview with an investigator from the state board. If you get this email, basically you can sit tight until you are contacted about scheduling your interview. The other option is you receive an email stating that additional information is needed. If you are told that the board needs additional information, they're going to tell you exactly what they need you to provide. So you'll need to collect that information. When you have it, you log back onto the pardon application website, upload that, and resubmit your pardon application. As we just said, the board conducts interviews, and they are in-person interviews with each pardon applicant. It typically takes a couple of months after you have submitted your pardon application to hear from an investigator to schedule your interview. If you live in Georgia, the interview typically will be conducted in your home. If you live outside of the state of Georgia, you will be required to travel back to Georgia for the interview. In that case, or in a case where someone doesn't have stable housing, the investigator will set the location of the interview. That's often in a probation office. Before your interview, read through your pardon application a couple of times. The investigator is going to be going over all of the information entered on the application to make sure that it's correct. Be aware that Investigators sometimes ask questions that may be uncomfortable to discuss. These questions can include questions about your childhood, such as whether you were subject to abuse when you were growing up. Often, some questions focus on drug and alcohol use. You will also be asked to describe what happened that led to your felony conviction. And just like we talked about earlier, when you're asked that question, you're going to want to take accountability and show remorse. You'll also be asked why you're applying for a pardon. And when you're asked this question, it's your chance to brag on yourself and your achievement. Think about all those wonderful accomplishments that you wrote in the justification section and let the investigator know about those achievements. Also, let the investigator know why you're getting a pardon is important to you. For example, if you needed a pardon for employment or housing, make sure that the investigator understands that. Now let's discuss what happens when you receive the decision on your pardon. Right now, we're seeing that it's taking about 8 months from the date the pardon application is submitted to receive a decision from the pardon board. And there are a couple of possible outcomes. First, your pardon, hopefully, will be granted. And if that happens, you will want to order a new GCIC report to make sure that the pardon has been properly entered on your GCIC. And we'll see what that looks like in the next slide. You're going to want to hold on to that pardon certificate so that you can present it to employers, housing agents, or anyone else who needs to see it. So that pardon certificate is going to be emailed to you at the email address that you used on your pardon application. Please remember, getting a pardon does not clear the conviction from your record. However, for most offenses, it does open up a pathway for record clearing. Another option is that your pardon is denied. Unfortunately, the pardon board, when they deny a pardon, they do not give us the reasons for that. It is a very short, typically 2 or 3 sentence letter that just says that your pardon application has been denied. If the application is denied, then you can reapply in 2 years. If you have previously applied for a pardon and you're not sure what happened there, or you just have, maybe you've lost a copy of your pardon certificate, then you can reach out to this pardon.inquiries@pap.ga.gov for a copy of your pardon certificate or a decision letter. And as promised, this is the example of a GCIC for someone who has had a pardon granted. So you see that highlighted language at the bottom that says pardoned, and depending on whether or not the board restored your firearms rights, you will either see with restoration of firearms rights or without restoration of firearms rights. So you should see this entry on each one of your pardon convictions. Now, I've been talking a lot and my voice is getting a little tired, so I'm going to do a little bit of a pop quiz here for y'all. Question is, if I am granted a pardon, do I have to tell a potential employer about my felony conviction or convictions if I'm asked about it? Think about that for a second. And here's our answer. Yes, we do recommend that you disclose that conviction, but you're also going to be able to explain that conviction has been pardoned and officially forgiven by the state of Georgia. Okay, so you have your pardon. Congratulations, but you are not done. To have your pardon conviction restricted and sealed, you're going to need to go back to the court where the case was prosecuted and file a petition requesting restriction and sealing. So let's say your pardon conviction was in Fulton Superior Court. You're going to need to go back to Fulton Superior Court and file a petition to restrict and seal the pardon conviction there. You're going to need to do this for each one of your pardon convictions. And it may be that they are in different jurisdictions. Maybe you have one in Fulton Superior, one in Cobb Superior. You're going to need to file a petition in each one of those jurisdictions for each of your pardoned felony convictions. And you're going to want to do this as soon as you get your pardon. And why is that? Because under the law, to qualify for restriction and sealing of a pardoned offense, you cannot have a conviction after receiving a pardon unless it's for a non-serious traffic offense. So you don't want to get a pardon and wait years down the road before you file for restriction and sealing, because there's a possibility that you could get arrested and convicted of another offense after that, and then you would not be able to restrict and seal your pardon convictions. Most pardon cases are eligible for restriction and sealing. However, serious violent felonies, sex offenses, and a few other types of cases are not eligible for restriction and sealing, even if you have a pardon. So please check out our materials in the toolkit for more information on which offenses are not eligible for restriction and sealing. And at this point, we are going to turn off our recording